This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we record courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Timothy Good and Emily Mendez, the editing team behind The Last of Us. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you for having me.
We're so happy to be here.
Now, I do have to ask, because I was going through your bios before this, and I noticed that, Tim, you referenced architecture in yours, and then Emily, you referenced it in yours as well, in your bios. And I'm wondering, what is the relationship between architecture and editing that made you both sort of feel it was important to reference?
I'm happy to start this because I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, which was a architectural town. Frank Lloyd Wright did all of his early work there for 20 years. And so I was always surrounded by it and fascinated by it. And it was one of the first things that I did as a child was I went to that Frank Lloyd Wright house, and they had these building blocks that were called, Wright blocks. And then you could build little things with it. And as a child, so that was the first thing I was doing, was building things. And then, of course, as the older I got, it was Legos, and then it was model airplanes, and then it was, other big things. And so architecture was all about detail, and it was all about building from pieces. And then when I started editing, I recognized that not only is editing building from pieces, but it shares a lot of the same principles as architecture in terms of space and compression and expansion of that space, and also the art of simplification. And how to not overdo something and over decorate, and how form follows function, which was a big Louis Sullivan architectural theory, that the way you build something affects how it is received. It's a very similar concept, and so for me, architecture has always had a really big basis in how I build as an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then for me, it's very similar. Tim has been a great mentor to me, and I've picked up a lot of his tricks. And the idea of looking at editing as an architectural build in a way has really changed kind of my whole perspective on editing. And it's something that I've really picked up from Tim that I use all the time now. So.
What were some of the tricks or techniques that you picked up from him?
The biggest technique that I've picked up from Tim is having the patience to watch through all the dailies while looking at it as preparing your ingredients for a recipe. That's something that Tim really taught me. I always used to struggle with this feeling of like, oh, I just want to cut. I just want to be editing. I start watching dailies and then I really want to get into it. But Tim has helped teach me this patience of watching through everything, and in your mind you're kind of being like, okay, well, this piece might be good for this moment and this piece might be good for that moment, and throwing down markers as we go to help us remember what we're thinking as we're watching the footage, because it's the first time you're experiencing the footage, and it's the best time to see like, oh, how do I respond to this naturally in this first moment I'm viewing this? And so really taking that time to watch through it is a big deal, and it's helped me so much.
Yeah, they're like cornerstones. When you watch things through with patience, you start developing the cornerstones of the structure. And you go, okay, this is going to work for this is going to work for that. And suddenly almost the structure, creates itself as you're watching it. And you start to build it in your head before you even put it down.
Yeah, it's really cool because you'll be like, oh, this is a great emotion that I'm feeling here, but then this other piece is really good for geography, and this piece is really good for clarity. And so you just start building those pieces, and by the time you're done watching dailies, you have a really good idea for the skeleton of your scene. So
now, Tim, I do have to ask, is
Sure.
Frank Lloyd Wright your favorite architect, or is there
Beyond? Yes. No, it's like, I don't know, hometown boy, I have to. So it's my absolute favorite. I'm very, very happy that in Los Angeles we have 4 of them, and so I get to go hang out and revisit.
Yeah. Now, you guys both worked on The Last of Us, so I guess my first question for you guys is, like, how did you guys get onto this project and get involved with it?
Oh my gosh! So it's kind of crazy. I am actually friends, sort of. I mean, I am now, but I was friendly with Craig Mazin through my husband. they were friends because they were both writers. And so Craig would come over to our house for dinner parties and with his wife and a couple other writers and whatnot. And we would just sort of have sometimes weird foods, and we would dare each other to eat them. And it was just sort of a fun time, but that was when he was writing comedies. And one dinner party, like 4 or 5 years ago, he brought the trailer for Chernobyl with him and said, guys, I just made this thing and it was incredible. And we watched it and I was just like shocked. And I said, I know I'm just right now, I'm, the husband in the corner serving you your cocktail. But I'm also an editor, and I would really love it. I would do anything to work on whatever you do next. And I was dogged in that because as soon as he announced Last of Us, my husband says, he also writes video games as well. He said, that's a really great one. This is an amazing story. You should really try and get on this. And so we tried, and it was a hard path because, HBO has their people that they like, and I hadn't done one. And so, but it turns out one of our Umbrella Academy directors was also going to be doing 2 episodes. So with that as our, sort of tailwind, we were able to find our way onto the show. And after that, it just somehow, through the miracle of dovetailing styles, Emily and I became the people that Craig really trusted.
And you guys went up to Calgary to cut?
I did for about 3 months. Emily at the time was still my assistant editor. So she was still in Los Angeles working remotely with me, which was very hard for me because we have such a symbiotic relationship and we're always constantly talking in real time. And so I would spend a lot of my day just on the phone with her because I was just like, all right, let's talk about this scene. Let's talk about that scene, But yes, I was up there and I was, I loved Canada. I loved Calgary. I loved the mountains. I loved being close to set. I was never on set except for once for just like a moment. But I loved being close to the production because you really got a sense of the camaraderie that was built by Craig and Neil. The whole team was this really wonderful family and everyone was treated so well and they treated us so well. It was great. I loved it.
My friends and I would make little videos in our backyards, imitations of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Eventually that need to tell stories became more of a technical interest and an interest in the art. To me, what's exciting is using cinema in its full potential, which is rhythm and sound design and music. Our job is to set up expectations and then deliver on them. I'm Brian Cates, and this is my course in film editing.
Did you guys play video games before? I mean, Tim, you referenced that your partner writes for video games, but do you guys play Last of Us before you started cutting? Or
excellent question, and the answer is I did not, and Emily did. And what was strange is you would think that I would play video games, but I just don't. As an editor, it's a little hard because it's a very all-encompassing sort of job, and I put a lot of detail into it. So I'm usually working a decent day, but at the same time, I just didn't have the time also to sort of research it when we got the job, and so I decided as a risk to take not to play it so that I could be the ambassador for the audience members that had not played the game. That said, Emily, you might want to continue now and tell us about your experience with this.
Sure. I had played the game a couple years before, and it had always been one of my favorite games because it has such a beautiful story. And it was one of the first games that I really connected with on a personal level. So when Tim told me that we could be moving on to this show, I was like, this is awesome. Like this is the best video game. Like I was so excited. And so really, we were kind of thrown into it, and we would just approach it where if there was anything special that I knew was game related that Tim maybe wouldn't pick up on, like I would tell him like, hey, this is Ellie's iconic red shirt from the game. Like people will know what that is, because we had all this montage footage where they're going through all this stuff in Bill and Frank's house. And there was a little piece where Ellie pulls out this red shirt. And I said to him, I was like, that's really important. So just making sure we were incorporating things like that from the beginning, that Neil and Craig would have gotten into the cut eventually, but it really helped that Tim and I just had that in from the beginning. So it was just like ready to go.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I never played the game, so maybe you can update me. But episode 3, I think it is,
Mhm.
that wasn't in the game. if I'm not
That's
mistaken.
correct.
It is not in the game, but it
Which-
is referenced in the game. The
What is
relationship.
Fascinating
So-
is it's almost like the opening of Up, where it's this like perfect sort of story. So how did you did you guys look to Up? What did you guys do for cutting that?
We looked to nothing. We honestly looked to the screenplay that Craig wrote. The screenplay that Craig wrote was still my favorite piece of writing on any sort of television or film I've ever done, or frankly looked at. It is a stunning piece of writing, and it was so emotional for me to read that as a gay man who is a Frank in the relationship with a Bill. I understood these characters very deeply. I understood the language between them. And so I was taking it not from referencing anything other than my own lived experiences and the document that Craig wrote. And it was the first thing that we were assigned, which was also unbelievable, that literally my rotation just lands right there. And I'm like, well, this is an amazing circumstance. And then Emily and I, as gay people, collaborated on this, as we always do. Like, I always talk with Emily about any scene I'm doing. She gives me feedback, and then I would give her several scenes in this episode to edit on her own under my tutelage, as always. And it allowed her to then showcase her skill as an editor to Craig as we finished it. But in general, in terms of approaching it, episode 3, it was about approaching it in the way that Craig approached the screenplay, which was through a character lens, the lens of character and nuance. And everything was based on how these characters related, and the strengths and the connections that were designed between them, and the connections that Craig created in the script between location and the passage of time. That was how we did it. We never looked outside.
Well, the thing I loved about it, though, was it's literally, because a lot of people, when they first see or hear about The Last of Us, their response, they think it's a zombie film or a zombie show. And so, there's a few people who they would be like, I'm not into zombies. And I'd be like, watch episode 3 first. I know it's out of order, but watch that, because then you can see that's the background sort of atmosphere, I guess you would almost call it. It's like the zombies are the atmosphere, and the stories are within.
Yeah, the zombies are the extras. So.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really quite true, actually. So.
Yeah. So I guess to jump to, because we had talked before we came on air about different things that or different scenes that you guys might want to talk about. And Emily, you chose to talk about when Joel picks up Ellie in the surgery room. I guess, can you give us a sense of, how you approach that scene?
Sure. So that's a really special scene, because we're coming off of this giant montage that Tim cut, and that I was lucky to do the sound design on, where we're really in Joel's mind, where he's going through this hospital, he's trying to find Ellie, and he's just killing all these people because he just needs to get to her. He needs to save her. So this scene where he gets to this OR, he's finally found her. And the way that I approached it when I was first cutting it was just sticking with his point of view. Like, we're with him. And when I was watching through the dailies, it's so tense. And so I wanted to keep that feeling, because we're so in Joel's mind of him seeing this girl who's now to him his baby girl, his daughter, his person that he's protecting. And so when we're with him, he's walking in, we see his face, we see that he's going to save her at this point. And what is interesting with that scene as well is, when this doctor comes at him, he kills that doctor in an instant, because it's so shocking in that moment. And I think it's really cool, because we've had this whole sequence where he's killed all these people, but it's all kind of in the background, because we worked really hard to kind of keep with the sound design where we're in Joel's mind versus in the real world. And then when we get to the scene in the OR, we're kind of back in the real world again. So to me, that moment just hits so hard. And then we kind of go into this beautiful emotional musical cue where he's picking up Ellie, and we have this gorgeous close-up shot where he's kind of cradling her, he brings her up and he's like, I got you. And so I just love that scene, because there's not really a lot of dialogue in it, and it's just so emotional. And I just felt like you feel so much with him, and it just shows us also just like the development of these characters, where they've gotten to at the end of the season, and I found it to be a beautiful scene to work on.
So because one of the things I remember from watching that scene was the sort of tension and the suspense in there. So when you were going through the footage, I guess going back to that cooking
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
analogy, like how did you sort of utilize the footage or go through the footage to figure out how to build the tension here?
Sure. So there were a couple shots we had that were like close-ups of Ellie with like a mask on for like the anesthesia, and like there was also like there were just some different surgery like B-roll shots which I incorporated, but not until Joel was seeing her. Like, so I wanted to like stay with him. So it's like I saw those and I was like, those are great, but I don't want to show them until he's looking. So then we're staying in his POV. And then there was also a shot of they played a lot with some slow motion shots and camera, and there was one specifically where Joel comes through the door, like through the surgical door. He's in the room. And I liked that moment of him entering and like us like being there with him coming into that room. Like, so there were just moments like that where I was just like, where I was feeling that emotion and I was just marking those kind of things. And I think when you're using those elements, but also building them in a way where it's like, okay, well, I don't want to show this B-roll shot until he's there. And I don't want to show him, talking to the surgeons until he's actually in the room and we've seen his face, waiting for those moments to actually allow that tension to hit. I think it works really well.
Now, you mentioned you did it from his perspective. So was the footage shot in a way so that you could get it from multiple perspectives, or was it primarily focused from his perspective?
I mean, really with the footage, you could cut it in a way where you could have been showing them working on Ellie before he even entered, because, they're always they generally will capture the actors walking in to the scene. So we had footage of him walking into the room, looking at the surgeons through the window of kind of this like little entry hallway before he goes into the surgery room. So in theory, yeah, you could have definitely done some cuts with the surgery team before he even entered, but that was a specific choice we made to wait.
Now I have to ask you, because this is like one of the sort of, I guess, challenging, I don't want to say challenging parts of the show, but like I guess gray area, because in the process of saving Ellie, she may be the cure also. So as an editor, were you like upset that he's not saving humanity, or are you happy that they get to keep Ellie?
That's a good question. I try to always approach the editing as a character-based kind of idea. So in that scene, I was approaching it as, this is Joel's scene. So for me in that moment, when I'm looking at footage and I'm editing, I'm pulling stuff based on how he's feeling, because I want to be with him. And for me, I think that I'm so like heavily connected to these characters. Like, I don't really care what I think. I kind of just like care what they think. And so I definitely am more just like honed in on Joel. And then also I love Ellie. So I'm also just very much on the side of like, we need to save Ellie. I mean, that's just kind of the obvious thing. But ultimately when I'm working, I'm just always trying to stick to like the story, stick to the characters, and just do the truest thing for those things.
Yeah, and anything that makes you feel like uncomfortable is good, I think.
Yeah.
Like anything that's like, what he's doing something that's, I don't know. So that's always like success for me.
Well, and that's like the gray areas, because you're like, yay, they're back together, but then at the same time you're like, humanity.
But nay, we're gonna die.
Yeah, we're all gonna die.
Yeah.
Well, and that was you mentioned sort of like, I guess, placing yourself in that emotional position.
Yeah.
So like when you're looking at the rushes, like how do you tell when all right, and this is a terrible question now that I think of it, but I'm going to go with it anyways. How do you tell when the performance is authentic in it for something that emotional?
That's actually a great question, by the way, and it's never been asked of us, and I think it's a really great question.
I think it's really good, and I think
one of the best.
Probably for every editor it's going to be different. For me, it's a feeling I get. If I'm watching dailies and I'm watching a performance and I have a feeling in my stomach, like, oh my God, like this feels like this is happening. I will always mark it. So for me, I judge it based on feeling and just what I experience. And it's why this goes back to, you know, when we're first watching the footage, and why it's so important to be patient and take the time to watch through it all, is just when you first have that reaction and you have the feeling of, oh, like that look that Joel is giving when he's walking through that door made me feel something. That's how I judge it.
How about yourself, Tim?
It's very similar to me. It's based on it's that, and it's also a very high, in my opinion, maybe it's not for others, I have a very high bullshit meter. Like I just go, nope, bullshit. I'm like freaking, I'm poker face, I'm just bullshit. No, I don't believe it.
You don't say it in front of the director.
I don't say it in front of them. No, of course not. But I still have this thing where I just go, that I don't know. And it has to convince me, and I'm a really tough judge. And so it's one of those things. And I also I'm very aware, and I over time I've adjusted. My own taste is adjusted, I should say, and it's been helped along by a lot of people. Actually, I shouldn't say it's all me. It helped me understand that sometimes the largest performance is not the best. And oftentimes the largest performance is the one that's seeking attention, and it doesn't need it. And so you have to look for the performances that are the ones that will cause the audience to want to, instead of react, to interact. And so you want to go closer to the character as opposed to just allow the character to, sort of present things to you. And so I look for that as well. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, that was a really hot moment. That was really great. And I'm like, but do they need to be that big? I don't know. I don't think so. In fact, let me try a version where it's not as big, because again, you're building over time. And sometimes maybe you go, all right, now at the 3/4 mark of when the argument is really, truly important, maybe now we allow them to get big because you built it all along that way. So it's sort of similar in that respect. And if I may, I want to go back to Emily's scene and just talk about one thing she did that I just loved in the opening of that. Is originally it was staged in such a way that everyone reacted to Joel as soon as he walked in. And they were like, oh, who, and Emily designed it so that he gets this private moment, and he walks in, and because we have the sort of the sound sort of is a little bit more in his head still, and so he gets this moment to see her, and you have that connection moment with her and him, and then he says, unhook her, and that causes them to turn around, versus originally he just sort of walks in and goes, unhook her. And what Emily did there was, I think, critical to the success of understanding why Joel would do what he does, because she gave that beat the weight that it required before he decides to do that. And the unhooker brings us right into the reel of the scene, and then again that gunshot at full fidelity at this point is a major contrast to how the previous sequence worked, and as Emily described, causes that to have much more impact. So I just wanted to give kudos over there to you.
And that whole idea came forth when I was watching the dailies, because I watched that performance and I thought, oh my God, Pedro's so good in this moment. Like we need to have this moment in the scene. And so my question was, how do I get this piece in there? How do I make it work? Well, what if I stall and allow him to see that? So that's kind of an example of how that all starts to work and how the architecture starts to build itself.
Yeah. Now, Tim, you also had a scene. Do you want to give us some background on the scene?
Sure, absolutely. And this is a really cool sequence that is in the 6th episode, and it's when Joel and Ellie are captured by basically raiders. They don't know who's capturing them, and they're all on horseback. And it was a really intricate scene, and it had a lot of moving parts, because there were a ton of horses, and then there were a ton of people. But also I was utilizing this methodology that we had been using this entire time, which is point of view and character-based editing. And it's always based on how you can attach the audience as much as you can to the central characters and the dynamic between them. And so every single instance in that sequence was based on how Joel and Ellie feel trapped and how they get separated. and how it feels when they're separated, and how Joel starts to have the second panic attack of his experience in this episode, when he's recognizing that there's a dog that can sniff out the cordyceps infection, and utilizing all of the sort of the powers of point of view. It was always about staying with Pedro as Joel when you see this dog approach Ellie, and you go into Pedro's mind, and all of a sudden you start seeing shots of the dog that don't make sense because they're from no one's point of view. They're like low and to the side as opposed to frontal. And one of the things I really loved about editing that is it gave you a sense that Joel's imagining now what's happening. He's seeing in his own mind what's happening, and so we're sort of processing. And then the sound of the dog attack became more internal to his head in a sound sequence that Emily helped us design, of course, as always. She designed this sort of panic attack sequence from the pilot to this point, and it allowed the audience to really feel that he had no control over it. And we never showed the moment where the dog interacts with Ellie, because we feel like, and I always felt that Pedro as Joel, his reaction is so much more interesting than to see what actually happens, than to reveal the result after it is done. And so, and for that reason, I love the scene. And then there's also a really interesting thing in the scene is that there's a character, Maria, who is introduced in the scene. And she used to have a lot of lines. She used to have a lot more lines in the scene. And we also didn't know how to introduce her necessarily. And I decided that I wanted to build a relationship between Ellie and Maria early on. And so I started using sort of couplets to show that Maria, this character, this sort of Black woman cowboy, is on this horse looking at Ellie, and she's connecting with her because they're ultimately going to share a connection in this episode. And I wanted to start building that from that ground level. And so when ultimately the character of Maria comes forward to introduce herself, we keep her very mysterious, but we've already known that she's very, very close and connected to Ellie. And so in those respects, that scene to me is a really great example of how even though we have all these amazing vistas in the Canadian wilderness, it's unreal, it's beautiful. It was always based on how we were focusing on how the characters were interacting within the scenes. Where's the tension there? And that's why I love that scene.
So I have a couple questions from that.
Yeah, sure.
So it sounded like you cut down some of the dialogue.
Mhm.
So when you're working with the director, how do you do you usually present like, here's the full cut with everything you've wanted, like that was in the script, and then work it down? Or do you like to go in and just be like, here's my vision for the scene?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it sort of depends on who you're working with. In my instance, I like to give directors the full cut, the everything. My belief is that if you show the initial filmmaker, as it were, the director, every piece of film that they did in a way that respects the scene, the story, and what was written, then instead of saying, oh, you lost, did you lose lines here? Like being confused as to what was done. If something, for example, isn't working, you may start to question your own abilities, your own confidences, whatnot, as opposed to saying, oh, here's everything. Here's the best version I can do, given how it was written, given how you filmed it, given all the pieces you did. Here's that version, and this is my interpretation of that version in its best form. And then they can say, okay, great, you have all the beats. Now you have 12 beats. We probably only need 4 beats. So very cool. And now let's why don't we, accelerate this area? We don't need these pauses here between these characters or these looks between these characters, because I want to save them for this part. And so instead of working on it from a perspective of what else do we have, or can we figure out an idea, it's a question of subtraction and sculpting. And I just prefer that methodology. And in this case, it was similar. It was like, we saw all these lines, we had all these lines in, and then over the course of working on it with Craig, actually, it was about making it more mysterious. And the less people say, the more mysterious they become.
So my other question for you about this is, you talked about the dog and sort of building that suspense.
Mhm.
And when I think about suspense, it's all about it's almost like a cat and mouse game with the audience. It's like, how much
Mhm.
information am I going to reveal to make you uncomfortable
That's
or
right.
suspenseful? So like, how did you find that balance? Because I feel like that would be something very tricky to execute. Like, did you have to do, like, I guess, how did you approach that to build that suspense?
Yeah, no, and what I really liked about the creating the suspense in that sequence. It was about how Joel and Ellie responded to the dog's introduction. And the
Mhm.
dog's introduction comes sort of shockingly out of nowhere. It's like, boom. And then you see the dog, and then once it's revealed that the dog can sniff out an infected, there was a great couplet of looks where Joel looks over to Ellie and Ellie looks over to Joel, and it's like, you can't, don't do anything, and that direction to him to not do anything is a father's worst nightmare, or someone who's pretending he's not a father. It's a nightmare to watch that happen, and to have her have done that, to have her say, don't do anything, whatever happens, if it kills me, it kills me. That creates, I think, the tension in the audience of he's now been told by her not to protect her, and that creates even more tension between the characters. So when the dog is approaching the Ellie character, and she's just sort of backing up from it, but and then now Joel knows he can't do anything because she's already said don't do it. So if I do it, then maybe she has a plan. Maybe she does. I don't know. I don't know what the plan is. Is there a plan? I have no idea. So all these questions that Joel must have about what's about to happen should be shared by the audience. And so in terms of building that tension, that's how I approached it.
Now, you've been really generous with your time, guys. So I have one last question for you. What would
Okay,
you
if
say
you
is
need
your-
more, you can. I just letting you know.
Yeah.
So
No, I was going to ask, what is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
of course.
Yeah.
Emily, go ahead.
Okay, mine is a YouTube show, and it is called Carmilla, and it has 3 seasons, I believe, and I have rewatched this so many times. They ended up making a movie as well, and it is a love story about a college student and another college student who ends up being a vampire. They're both women, and it is something that I will rewatch on a rainy day, and I love, and it's low budget and just a lot of really campy, crazy storylines going on. And it's like a single camera just sitting at a desk, and it's like they're talking to a computer the whole time, but there's so much happening, and I just love it. It's crazy and great.
Is it campy? Like they know it's campy, but having
Oh
fun
yeah.
with it? Okay,
They
good.
totally lean into it, and they'll come like running into the room and tell you all these crazy things that have happened on campus. And it's just like, it's just so funny, so out there, but then you have this like cute little romance. And so that's my guilty pleasure show. I watch it all the time.
How about yourself, Tim?
Oh my God, I'm not as interesting. Mine is honestly House Hunters International. I love House Hunters International, not House Hunters. I don't care about anything in
It has
America,
to be international.
but it has to be international, because I don't know why, but I guess being in a small darkened room for 12 hours a day for months on a time makes me want to explore other places, and I can't. So I just love watching other people do that. And I go, I love, of course, being judgmental. So this is a wonderful thing. I get to go, no, not that one, this one. And why would you do that? And this and that. So I get very invested in these crazy characters. And then inevitably I turn to my husband and go, we could live in Italy. So,
Where is the one location that you would want to live?
Honestly, all right, this is so loaded, but it's going to be the location I just visited, Norway. I love Norway. Love Norway. I was just there recently for an amazing event, Nordic Media Days, and I got to be in Bergen and Oslo, and it was just the most lovely place to be. Everyone was so incredibly friendly, and if they weren't, they were very clear that it's not anything against me. It's just the way they are. So, and I was even told this. They're like, oh, we're just, don't expect us to come up and hug you. So it's not going to happen. And I kind of like that. So I was like, good. I don't have to do, no pleasantries necessary. And it was just a wonderful place to be. And it was a beautiful location. Not just that, but it's a great society. And I just loved the way that they live.
I had a friend who had to go do a mix in Norway,
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, he was like, it was the best experience he's ever had because everyone was just straightforward and blunt. And
Yeah.
he's like, so there was no like dancing around trying to get it'd be like, I don't like it, and this is why. He said it was
Yeah.
the
No,
fastest. He's like, we moved so
fastest
fast.
ever.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview today, guys.
Thank
Yeah.
you. for
Thank you
having
very much,
us.
Gordon.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.